Well, I first want to thank David Comiskey at the University of Ulster for introducing me to this community. I think this it seems like it's a very worthwhile event for me to share with my colleagues here at Penn State University who are doing a lot of BIM work in architectural engineering and architecture. I'm coming from a landscape architecture perspective, but I work with an interdisciplinary studio called the CoLab, or the Collaborative Studio. And we've been working on this studio for a number of years, 7 to be exact, and I've been working on the studio for about 5 years. Scott Wing, who's listed on this work, has worked with the studio for 5 years, so he's been instrumental for a lot of the work that we're doing and some of the research that's coming out of the studio. Let me first talk about the typical studio. For years, we've taught studios much in the same way. We've for about 150 years, as we're saying here, but it's problem-based synthetic learning environments. We typically structure this around individual work through one-on-one faculty guidance. And so that's how the students work in both architecture and landscape architecture and working in the studios. The CoLab studio actually tries to turn things up a little bit in far as getting almost as it is a bridge studio to practice, where you are not going to be just working as sole practitioners in a studio, but you're going to be working with interdisciplinary collaborators. And so the CoLab studio is a 30-person design class that groups architects, landscape architects, and 4 disciplines of architectural engineers. That's lighting, electrical, structural, mechanical, and the construction managers who are also part of the studio. And as I said, we just completed our 7th year in that. One of the processes that actually help make this work is we actually follow the integrated project delivery workflow. We actually don't do delivery, it's really more just integrated project design, where all members share responsibility and leadership. We do have a little bit of a issue with a credit load, so architects are taken for 6 credits, landscape architects are taken for 5 credits, and the AE students are taking it for 3 credits. And that sometimes shows up in the commitments levels that students can actually provide to the studio. One of the things we talk to the students about, and you've probably all seen this kind of diagram, this is out of HOK, that talks about the rationale to integrated project delivery workflow, and that is design changes are easier or more cost effective if they're actually developed earlier. And the more you know about a project, the more you know while it's being built, the easier those costs are going to be to handle, and hopefully it eliminates that whole litigation period within the firms, where firms are pointing at each other who did what wrong. If you're sharing the ownership on a project, you're sharing the responsibility on a project, and we try to make sure the students win as a team and they lose as a team. We actually do have winners and losers in this team. One of the things we do like to try to figure out someday is we like to be able to have the students fire each other. That would be an interesting thing to help team collaboration. But we want to make sure complex projects that do require interdisciplinary high collaboration at the beginning. Our projects, we've had a range of projects in the studio. We started in 2009 with kind of a prototypical project. 2010 was a daycare facility. 2011 was a school project. We only had 3 teams at that time. But then 2012, we had a big 100,000 square foot multi-purpose sports building. 2013 was an energy building, 25,000 square feet. And 2014 was a student enrichment center. In 2015, we just finished up, was a classroom lab space on campus at Penn State. But we try to have a real project typically out for bid, and we're actually working with the real project team. So we're actually working just past their schematic design. The firms already have done schematic design. Hopefully they have some benchmarking, and our students then follow along in the same RFP to that project. We also want to make sure the project actually has the complexity where it's a capstone project to them. The architects for sure can do that. It's the landscape architects that we have a hard time with, because oftentimes a really good architectural project doesn't have a very good landscape architecture scope. So we have to be a little creative in our studio. We found 25,000 square feet is a pretty good size, what is that, 2,000 square meters, something like that. We do use building information modeling as a process. We don't specify a software package, although Revit is our program of choice. But they work with a wide range of software, and the students oftentimes will find that software in that studio and try to incorporate it. The other I should have more animation here. But so one of the things that's really interesting about this studio when we have the interdisciplinary collaboration is when we actually work with the construction engineers or construction managers, and that the students start understanding phasing of the project, or even where things, how the constructability of the project is going to be, and how that, just as far as getting cranes in there, stockpiling equipment. That's the stuff that landscape architects, to be honest, aren't considering when they work in a design studio in the 4th and 5th years. So using the software, they're able to actually convey that to understand what's going to be in the end of the project. Oops, I guess that was it. The student actually produced a couple formats for their projects. They actually work with the outcomes. They work with booklets they put together that talk about the studio project, from schematic design, or actually conceptual design, schematic design, and design development. We also have a final design, but they're really not construction documents, but it's the final design where they actually, because they can't, we have a budget to the project, they'll actually do variance analysis to why their budget, or why certain things were exceeded the real project. We know what the real project ended up costing. We know what the energy model of the project ended up costing. And so the students will actually do variance analysis to why their project was either above or below those benchmarks. They also do posters, and they also do these presentations, more formal presentations to client groups or stakeholder groups to actually give a real feel to that project. So one of the challenges to this studio is we have a lot of other students doing other studio projects. In my school alone, in Suckman School, we have 500 students competing for space. The architectural engineers are also coming in also competing for space. And the lab environments that we actually teach in aren't exactly conducive to collaboration. So getting everyone in place at the same time is always a continuing difficulty with the 3 disciplines or 3 departments. So of course we have the space constraints, as I talked about, and also the individual work is not is geared toward, those labs environments are more geared toward individual work. So we're actually, for a few years now, we've been experimenting with these collaboration pods. Pods that were actually like these mini firms where students are actually spaced out on campus, and now we're actually looking at other campuses where they could be spaced out, where they're dispersed, very much like a professional office that's dispersed in multiple office locations. So we're actually trying to echo that kind of experience. Students, as I say, bring in different collaboration software into the mix. We also have some recommended things, but we talk about whether it's going to be synchronous or asynchronous work within the students. Synchronous is obviously what we like to be able to do. We like face-to-face interaction. We have our studio environments that are face-to-face interaction. So we'll sometimes just simulate what we do in studio. We'll try to simulate. If it's not going to be together, we'll do virtual, but it's all going to be face-to-face interaction. In fact, yesterday I just did a face-to-face interaction with my students in another studio while I was here. But that can always work. Obviously, space-time, geographic locations, difference of hours, those things have to then, to me, turn to asynchronous. I'm posting an assignment today for my students to actually do an asynchronous exercise where we're going to post things and we're going to be sharing things asynchronously. So some of the software or groupings that we look at, video conferencing, the Skype, FaceTime, those kind of things. GoToMeeting Free is what I just used yesterday. There's other software that students are actually bringing in to actually work with their teammates. Most likely we end up using web conferencing software. The GoToMeeting platform has actually worked really, really well for us. We've had some educator grants for that Citrix has provided us. The audio quality, the fidelity has been great for our interaction. We have used other things like Cisco Jabra or Adobe Connect that Penn State uses. We have done the virtual meetings where we have had simultaneous connections. One was the Icon Lab, which we saw Kaman talking about in his talk earlier. So the Icon Lab talking directly to another Icon facility we had in Philadelphia. So it's a virtual, well, the students are talking to the professionals in Philadelphia. Now, this is not always the optimum because we don't always have that technology. We don't always have those 3 screens and that infrastructure. So the GoToMeeting has been our go-to placement. Person in the center here was talking. He's from the Office of Physical Plant at Penn State, and he's talking to the students who are actually at all their pods to give kind of the instructions on where the students are going next on the projects. Basically treating each student as a firm that are competing on the project, that guy actually is running the project at Penn State. He's working alongside the real project team, so he's asking similar questions to those students. So it's giving them a very real experience. Whiteboarding is another package that of course we have to use. It's a staple to online, although it's not as simple on multi-platform or on cross-platform environments, by the way. So we've used a program called Concept Board, which is a nice online-based canvas that students actually work on. TeamViewer, of course, Adobe Connect and GoToMeeting both do whiteboarding, but Concept Board is what actually I'm using today for some of my students. projects. TeamViewer we've used for remote access. So students actually in our lab environments, sometimes software licensing is an issue. So sometimes students want to use software that's licensed in another department, and they'll bring into to the other lab or to their pods that they're just remote accessing in, even different platforms. BIM 360 Glue product we're using a lot for clash detection, to bring students into the same environments where they're able to make some comments. Most importantly, they're just able to see some clashes within their own projects and make comments to it, just to give them that feel of how it's going to work, how they can leverage the cloud for that collaboration. This is one of the packages that students actually brought in. We might use other products for project management in a firm, whether it's Advantage or project or Microsoft Project, but students are actually picking up on a program called Trello. Didn't know about Trello, and then the students actually turned me on to that product. Pretty nice software, works on different platforms. Students are able to communicate to each other, give updates on what they're working on. Teamwork's another nice package. Both these nice free packages that you can use for doing project management. And task management. One of the packages that we are using in our Penn State just started a geodesign program, online geodesign program that we're leveraging on our Penn State's MGIS program, which you might have heard about on our rural campus. But we're using virtual environments in here. This is actually our Penn State space on the virtual environment using Avaya Live. This is not like Second Life. Second Life is actually, as John Messner, a colleague at Penn State, calls Second Life as a game without a goal. Avaya Life actually has a goal for us in educating. So the collaboration hardware kind of cover some of these pieces. Nothing crazy. A nice 60-inch screen that we're using. The Jabra microphone, I have to say, I have no stock in Logitech, but I'm going to say that Jabra microphone for $69, which is in the center there, is one of the best conferencing microphones that I've used in a studio environment, which you can imagine, a lot of ambient sound, has worked out really well for us. And of course, then in a studio environment, we have to have the students on headphones, splitters. And I was like, wait a second, there's only a 5-point splitter, so we had to make a 6-point splitter. You can't find a 6-point splitter for our students in the environment. We also leverage multi-touch displays for our students to actually work with those within those environments as well. But the video gateway devices as well for people bringing multi-devices to be able to share on that screen. We haven't used all these packages. We've used the iStick in the Mediascape, or Air Media, that is, in our environment. But one of the things we try to do with this environment, because it's actually working with community involvement, is democratizing the technology. A lot of the virtual studios that we've done in the past have been proprietary infrastructure, things that a community member would not have. So these tools have now come out online in the last 5 or so years that are really nice to be able to use, these GoToMeeting products. Actually, it might have been longer than 5 years ago, but really, even just the technology, the laptops and tablets, have really been able to pull these community members involved. Of course, as I found out yesterday, hotel Wi-Fi is also an important factor to this technology. It also helps us with our practitioner involvement. And practitioners oftentimes have whatever laptop their IT group gave them and whatever permissions they have to turn on certain plugins, right? So this technology is getting a lot better for us to be able to work. But some of the research questions that we've been asking ourselves in this studio, in the CoLab research, is, first of all, we're trying to seek a space that creates an environment for collaboration information exchange. This is very similar to what we're trying to do in BIM and just as the process in BIM, but what environment are we going to use to actually optimize that information exchange? We want to use that same data on multiple things. We don't want to have students create one product and then regenerate it. One of the things I didn't show up here, we actually have our students do something called a BIM execution plan. That's another thing that John Messner has put together at Penn State that actually asks students to figure out what does they want BIM to do for their teams. Now, a student in a 4th year or 5th year studio doesn't really understand life cycle management of a building, doesn't understand what an owner needs BIM for. They're only concerned about what they need to do before they graduate. They already got jobs, a lot of them. They're already on internships. They just want to know what they need to do for the project. So what they end up thinking about is their information exchanges that they end up doing in the studio. What do they need to do to get the product to produce in the studio? So that's one of the things we look at. But the other things that are actually more important or pertinent to folks in my peers is, do virtual studio environments alter the quality of the studio collaboration compared to resident studio environments? That face-to-face interaction that you have with a student to go, the ebb and flow of those questions doesn't work as well on a jittery internet connection or even just that face-to-face online. There's a loss of, there's a little dynamics that are being lost. How do we make that better? How do we make that more personable? So there's different research that we're working into. That avatar environment of the Avaya space, some people will argue that Avaya space for a large class gives you a couple reasons. One, it gives some sense of anonymity to the world, but it also gives you some sort of presence that you're with somebody else, right? So if you're going to an online class that is a bunch of avatars, you at least feel like you're with somebody. An online class that you're just seeing like a screen, a dashboard, you don't feel like you're with anybody. It's a black hole. But the other thing is the anonymity that some people ever talk about the virtual environment, that you end up having more voices at the table that you wouldn't normally have. You've all worked in project meetings where there's one person that's outspoken. Maybe it's your boss. Maybe you don't want to speak up against the boss. But the other thing is you want to be able to have everyone share their information, share their thoughts. And sometimes the virtual environments help enable those students to be able to do that, or that team to be able to do that. It also keeps a nice record, by the way, so you actually keep track of that things. How do we best include outside practitioner design, construction, expertise into the design studio experience? I only know so much from the landscape architecture profession, and my architectural engineering faculty does not know all the disciplines of architectural engineering for all those different questions. So we're able to leverage some of the experts in the field to have those students' questions be answered more effectively. So using the practitioners in the virtual environments is helpful. I should also keep in mind that Penn State University is in rural center Pennsylvania. We market ourselves as being close proximity to New York, Washington, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, so it's a good marketing tool for us for that. However, we don't have a lot of practitioners and expertise at Penn State or in State College. So we're able to use our virtual tools to pull those students in so they don't have to travel. The other thing is, how do we best engage design studios to geographic dispersed students? So we are mindful that there are going to be people in different time zones, different things, so asynchronous collaboration or that optimum time during the day. This is nothing untypical to other multinational firms, but our students, they're not always engaged in that endeavor. In a firm, you have the point of being in a shared project, your shared profitability, all those kind of things. A student doesn't feel the same way in a credit hour kind of thing to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to meet with the class that's hosted in Europe or somewhere else. So we're still looking at how that is actually be optimized. We actually will be jumping into that next semester in our geodesign program, where we start our first online geodesign studio, which has some people from Australia into United States. So should be fun. So thank you very much.